My dad found my love letters to my ex-boyfriend and read the most personal parts to my entire family at the dinner table, mimicking my voice. 15 relatives laughed at my feelings. I never thought a turkey dinner could destroy my soul, but here we are. Last Thursday changed everything I thought I knew about family boundaries and basic human decency. I'm still processing what happened, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever look at my father the same way again. So here's the backstory. I'm 24, living back home in Maryland after finishing college last year. The job market has been brutal, and moving back in with my parents seemed like the smart financial choice while I figured things out. My room is in the basement, not glamorous, but it's private and rent-free, so I can't complain too much. About 6 months ago, I went through a really messy breakup with someone I'd been dating for 2 years. Without getting into all the drama, let's just say it ended badly. He was my first real love, the kind where you think you're going to spend forever together. When it fell apart, I was devastated. I spent weeks writing him letters, not emails or texts, but actual handwritten letters on pretty paper. I poured my heart out in those pages, talking about all our memories, how much I missed him, how sorry I was for the things that went wrong between us. I never sent any of them. They were just my way of processing the grief and getting all those overwhelming feelings out of my system. I kept them in a shoebox under my bed, along with some photos and other mementos from our relationship. It felt therapeutic to write everything down, even if he'd never read the words. My dad has always been the type who thinks boundaries don't apply to him. Growing up, he'd go through my backpack, read my diary if he found it, and justified everything as being a concerned parent. Even now that I'm an adult, he still treats my space like it's his to explore whenever he wants. I've had countless conversations with him about privacy, but he always brushes it off with some joke about how it's his house and his rules. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, our basement had a small flood from a burst pipe. Nothing major, but enough that I had to move all my stuff upstairs temporarily while they fixed the flooring. I was scrambling to pack everything quickly because I had to work that day, and I guess I didn't hide the shoebox as well as I thought I did. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were normal. My mom was stressing about cooking for the whole extended family like she does every year. My dad was in a weirdly good mood, making jokes and acting extra cheerful. I didn't think anything of it at the time. He's always loved having a house full of people to entertain. Thanksgiving Day arrived with the usual chaos. My mom's 3 sisters came with their families, plus my dad's brother and his wife, and my grandparents on both sides. The house was packed with 15 people total, ranging from my 4-year-old cousin to my 80-year-old grandmother. Everyone was squeezed around our dining room table and the card table we set up in the living room. Dinner went normally at first. We had the typical conversations about work, weather, and family gossip. My grandmother complained about her arthritis, my uncle talked about his new truck, and my cousins showed off their latest school projects. I was actually enjoying myself, feeling grateful to be surrounded by family after such a rough year. Then came dessert time. My mom brought out her famous pumpkin pie, and everyone was settling in for that post-meal relaxation period. That's when my dad stood up and announced he had a special Thanksgiving surprise for everyone. My stomach dropped immediately. I knew that look in his eyes, the same one he'd get when he was about to embarrass me in front of my friends as a teenager. But I never could have imagined what came next. He pulled out my shoebox from behind his chair. My heart literally stopped beating for a moment when I saw it. All the blood drained from my face and I felt like I was going to throw up right there at the dinner table. He opened the box and pulled out one of my letters, one of the most personal ones I'd written. Then he started reading it out loud in this horrible, exaggerated version of my voice, making me sound like a lovesick teenager in a bad movie. The letter he chose was one where I'd written about how much I missed the way my ex used to hold me when I had nightmares, how empty my bed felt without him, and how I'd give anything to have just one more day together. These were my deepest, most vulnerable feelings written during my darkest moments after the breakup. But my dad didn't just read the words, he performed them. He made his voice high and whiny, added dramatic gestures, and paused at the most intimate parts to make exaggerated swooning faces. The whole table erupted in laughter. My cousins were practically falling off their chairs, my aunts were giggling behind their hands, and even my grandparents were chuckling. I sat there frozen, unable to move or speak. It felt like one of those nightmares where you're naked in public and can't find anywhere to hide. Every word he read felt like a physical blow. These weren't just random thoughts, they were pieces of my soul that I'd put down on paper during the worst period of my life. He didn't stop with just one letter. Oh no, that would have been too merciful. He had apparently read through the entire box and picked out what he considered the best parts from multiple letters. He kept going for what felt like hours but was probably about 10 minutes, reading passage after passage while doing his cruel impression of me. One letter talked about how I blamed myself for not being good enough to make the relationship work. Another described a dream I'd had where my ex came back and we got married in my childhood backyard. The most humiliating one detailed how I'd been sleeping with his old t-shirt because it still smelled like him. With each revelation, the laughter got louder. My teenage cousins were recording parts of it on their phones. My uncle was making jokes about young love being so dramatic. My aunt suggested I should write romance novels since I was so good with emotional language. I finally found my voice and begged him to stop, but he just smiled and said everyone was enjoying the entertainment. My mom sat there silently, not stepping in to defend me or tell him to put the letters away. She looked uncomfortable but didn't say a word to stop the humiliation. When he finally finished his performance, the whole table gave him a round of applause like he'd just put on some amazing show. People were wiping tears from their eyes from laughing so hard. My dad took a little bow and made some comment about how I'd always been his dramatic little girl. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran upstairs to my temporary room and locked the door. I could hear them downstairs still talking and laughing about what had just happened. Someone made a joke about keeping me away from stationery stores, and another person suggested they should check my room for more literary treasures. I spent the rest of Thanksgiving Day and the entire weekend that followed hiding in my room. I couldn't face anyone. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I felt sick thinking about having to see the people who had laughed at my most private thoughts. The worst part wasn't even the public humiliation, it was the complete betrayal of trust. Those letters represented the most vulnerable I'd ever been in my life. Writing them had been my way of processing heartbreak and trying to heal. My dad took that sacred space and turned it into a comedy show for his own amusement. I kept replaying the scene in my head, remembering every laugh, every joke, every smirk. I felt exposed and violated in a way I'd never experienced before. It was like he'd stripped me naked in front of everyone and then handed out magnifying glasses so they could examine every flaw. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since Thanksgiving and things have somehow gotten even worse. I thought maybe people would forget about it and move on, but that was incredibly naive of me. First, I discovered that my teenage cousins had posted clips of my dad's performance on their social media accounts. Apparently, they thought it was hilarious content for their followers. One of them even added captions like, "When your uncle roasts your cousin," and "family dinner entertainment." The videos got shared around their school and now a bunch of teenagers I don't even know have seen my private thoughts being mocked. I found out about the videos when a friend from high school messaged me asking if I was okay. She'd seen one of the clips that had been shared by someone she knew. The humiliation hit me all over again, but this time it was amplified because now it wasn't just my family, it was spreading to people I might run into around town. I confronted my dad about the videos, and his response was to shrug and say he couldn't control what other people did with their phones. He acted like I was being overly sensitive and said I should be flattered that people found me entertaining. When I pointed out that those were my private feelings he'd exposed, he rolled his eyes and told me I was being dramatic, just like always. That conversation made me realize he genuinely doesn't understand what he did wrong. In his mind, he was just having fun and bringing some laughter to a family gathering. The fact that he destroyed my privacy and trust in the process doesn't register as a problem for him. My mom finally talked to me about what happened, but not in the way I'd hoped. Instead of apologizing for not stopping him or acknowledging how wrong it was, she tried to excuse his behavior. She said he didn't mean any harm and that families should be able to laugh together. She suggested I was taking it too personally and that I should try to see the humor in the situation. When I explained how violated and humiliated I felt, she got defensive and said I was trying to make everyone feel guilty for enjoying themselves. She pointed out that everyone had been having such a nice time until I made it all about me by getting upset. Apparently, in her view, I was the one who ruined Thanksgiving by not being a good sport about having my most intimate thoughts turned into entertainment. The conversation with my mom was almost worse than the original incident because it made me realize that neither of my parents sees anything wrong with what happened. They both think I'm overreacting and they're frustrated with me for not just getting over it and moving on. I've been looking for apartments online, but everything in my price range is either a complete dump or requires roommates I don't know. My savings account is pretty pathetic since I've been struggling to find steady work, and most landlords want first month, last month, and a security deposit up front. I'm basically trapped living with people who think my pain is funny and my boundaries are optional. The worst part of this whole situation is how isolated I feel. I can't talk to my family about it because they think I'm being ridiculous. I don't really have close friends nearby since most of my college friends moved away after graduation. The few people I've tried to talk to about it don't seem to grasp how devastating this was for me. One friend told me that parents embarrass their kids all the time and that this would all blow over eventually. Another said I should be glad my family is close enough to joke around like that. Nobody seems to understand that this wasn't normal family teasing, it was a complete violation of my privacy and dignity. I've been having trouble sleeping and eating since Thanksgiving. Every time I think about that night, I feel physically sick. I keep imagining all those people laughing at the most vulnerable parts of myself, and I can't shake the image of my dad performing my heartbreak like it was a comedy routine. I've also been wondering what else he's read that he hasn't shared yet. Has he gone through my computer? My phone? Are there other private things he's saving up for future entertainment? The thought that nothing in my life is actually private anymore is terrifying. I've started keeping anything important in a lockbox that I carry with me everywhere, but it feels ridiculous that I have to protect my privacy like I'm living with strangers instead of family. Update 2. Christmas is in 2 days and I've been dreading it for weeks. The extended family is coming over again, and I know everyone's going to be thinking about Thanksgiving. I can already picture the knowing looks and inside jokes. But something unexpected happened last weekend that changed everything. My grandmother on my mom's side called and asked if she could come over early to help with Christmas preparations. She's always been my favorite family member, the one who actually listens when I talk and treats me like a real person instead of just the family entertainment. When she arrived, she asked if we could talk privately. We sat in the kitchen while my mom was upstairs wrapping presents, and she told me she'd been thinking about Thanksgiving ever since it happened. She said she didn't laugh that night, even though I thought everyone had been enjoying the show. She'd been horrified by what my dad did, but she didn't know how to stop it without making an even bigger scene. She apologized for not speaking up and said she'd regretted her silence every day since then. Then she told me something that completely shocked me. Apparently, after everyone left that night, she'd called my mom and told her exactly what she thought about what had happened. She said my dad's behavior was cruel and that my parents should be ashamed of themselves for humiliating me like that. My mom had apparently gotten defensive and said the same things to my grandmother that she'd said to me, that it was all in good fun and that I was overreacting. My grandmother didn't back down though. She told my mom that if she'd done something like that to one of her daughters when they were young, my grandfather would have been furious. The conversation escalated and my mom ended up hanging up on my grandmother. They hadn't spoken since then, which explained why Christmas preparations had been so tense around the house. My grandmother then asked me about the shoebox and whether my dad had returned my letters. When I told her he'd kept them, her face went dark in a way I'd never seen before. She marched upstairs and demanded that my dad produce the box immediately. I followed behind her, not sure what was happening but fascinated to see someone finally standing up to him. He tried to brush her off the same way he'd dismissed my concerns, but my grandmother wasn't having it. She told him he had exactly 5 minutes to bring her that box or she was calling my grandfather to come handle the situation. My dad clearly didn't want to deal with my grandfather, so he went to his room and came back with my shoebox. My grandmother took it and handed it directly to me, then turned back to my dad with a look that could have melted steel. She told him that what he'd done was not only cruel but potentially illegal, since reading someone else's private correspondence without permission could be considered a violation of privacy laws. She said if he ever touched my personal belongings again, she'd make sure there were consequences he wouldn't like. Then she turned to my mom, who had appeared during the confrontation, and told her that she was disappointed in both of them. She said that parents are supposed to protect their children's dignity, not destroy it for entertainment. She pointed out that I was 24 years old and deserved basic respect as an adult. The whole confrontation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like everything shifted in the house afterward. My parents were both sulking and avoiding eye contact with everyone. My grandmother asked if I wanted to come stay with her and my grandfather for a few days, and I immediately said yes. I've been at my grandparents' house for the past 4 days, and it's been like stepping into a completely different world. They treat me like an actual human being with feelings and boundaries. My grandmother made my favorite soup, and my grandfather set up a comfortable workspace in their den so I could continue job hunting. More importantly, they've been listening to me talk about how the whole situation affected me without trying to minimize my feelings or rush me to get over it. My grandmother shared some stories about times when her own privacy had been violated as a young woman, and how long it took her to feel safe again afterward. Yesterday, my mom called my grandmother and asked when I was coming home for Christmas. My grandmother told her that I was welcome to stay as long as I needed to and that maybe my parents should think about whether their house felt like a safe place for me right now. That conversation apparently led to my parents having a big fight. My mom called back later and asked to speak to me directly. For the first time since Thanksgiving, she actually apologized. She said she'd been thinking about what my grandmother said, and she realized that she'd prioritized keeping the peace over protecting me. She admitted that she should have stopped my dad that night, and that she'd been wrong to dismiss my feelings afterward. She asked if I would consider coming home for Christmas and promised that nothing like this would ever happen again. I told her I needed to think about it. Part of me wants to believe that she's genuinely sorry and that things could be different. But another part of me remembers how quickly she defended my dad's actions and dismissed my pain. Trust isn't something that can be rebuilt with one phone conversation. My dad still hasn't apologized directly. According to my mom, he's angry that my grandmother made such a big deal out of everything and thinks the whole family is overreacting. He apparently feels like he's being treated unfairly and doesn't understand why everyone is upset with him. I'm supposed to decide by tomorrow whether I'm going back for Christmas. My grandparents have made it clear that I'm welcome to stay here, and honestly, the thought of a peaceful holiday without worrying about being humiliated sounds amazing. But I also know that not going home for Christmas will probably create a permanent rift in the family. My mom seems genuinely remorseful, and I don't want to punish her for my dad's actions if she's really trying to make things right. I keep going back and forth on what to do. Should I give them another chance, or is it better to protect myself and stay where I feel safe? Final update. I decided to go home for Christmas, but with conditions. I told my mom I'd come back if she promised that my dad wouldn't be allowed to make any jokes or comments about what happened, and that if he started anything, she had to shut it down immediately. She agreed. Christmas Day was awkward but manageable. My dad barely spoke to me, which was actually preferable to his usual behavior. When the extended family arrived, nobody mentioned Thanksgiving, and I got the sense that my grandmother had probably had words with some of them too. The real surprise came on December 26th. I was packing to go back to my grandparents' house when my mom knocked on my door and asked if we could talk. She sat down on my bed and started crying, which completely caught me off guard. She told me she'd been doing a lot of thinking over the past few weeks, and she realized that what happened at Thanksgiving wasn't an isolated incident. She said she'd been enabling my dad's boundary-crossing behavior my entire life, always making excuses for him instead of protecting me. She shared some memories I'd almost forgotten about. Times when he'd embarrass me in front of friends, invaded my privacy, or made me the target of his jokes throughout my childhood and teenage years. She said she'd always told herself it wasn't that serious because he didn't mean any harm, but seeing my reaction to the letter incident made her realize how much damage had been done over the years. Then she told me something that explained a lot about why she'd been so defensive initially. Apparently, my dad had convinced her that I was being overdramatic about the whole thing, and that I was trying to manipulate the family into feeling sorry for me. He'd made her believe that I was the problem, not his actions. It wasn't until my grandmother called and pointed out how wrong the situation was that my mom started to question his version of events. She said talking to my grandmother made her realize that she'd been gaslighted by my dad for years, always being told that her concerns about his behavior were unreasonable. My mom apologized for not protecting me better throughout my life, and for letting my dad make me feel like my reactions to his behavior were the real problem. She promised that things would be different going forward, and that she wouldn't let him cross my boundaries anymore. I was honestly shocked by this conversation. I'd never expected my mom to have such a moment of clarity about the family dynamics, and I definitely hadn't expected her to acknowledge the pattern of behavior that had been going on for years. We talked for over 2 hours about everything, not just the Thanksgiving incident, but all the ways my dad had made me feel small and exposed throughout my life while she stood by and let it happen. It was painful but also healing to finally have someone validate what I'd experienced. The next day, something even more unexpected happened. My dad asked to speak with me privately. I was nervous about what he might say, but I agreed to hear him out. He didn't exactly apologize for reading my letters, but he did say that he hadn't realized how much it would upset me. He claimed he thought I'd find it funny eventually, like other times when he teased me about things. He said he never intended to hurt me and that he was sorry I'd been so affected by it. It wasn't the full acknowledgement I'd hoped for, but it was more than I'd expected from him. He also promised that he wouldn't go through my personal belongings anymore, and that he'd try to be more mindful of my privacy. I told him that trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and that it would take time for me to feel comfortable around him again. He seemed to understand that, even if he didn't fully grasp why his actions had been so devastating. The biggest change has been in my mom. She's been actively working to rebuild our relationship and prove that she meant what she said. When my dad makes comments that cross the line, she actually calls him out on it now instead of just letting it slide. It's created some tension between them, but she's held firm on her promise to protect my boundaries. I ended up staying at my grandparents' house for another week after Christmas, just to give myself more time to process everything. When I came back home, the atmosphere in the house was noticeably different. My dad was more careful about what he said around me, and my mom was more attentive to making sure I felt respected. It's been 3 weeks since Christmas now, and things aren't perfect, but they're definitely better. I still don't fully trust my dad not to violate my privacy again, so I'm careful about what I leave around the house. But my mom has proven that she's serious about changing the family dynamics, and that's made a huge difference. I've also been saving money more aggressively so I can move out as soon as possible. Living with my parents as an adult was always meant to be temporary, but now I have extra motivation to make it as short as possible. I want to be in a place where my privacy is guaranteed and I don't have to worry about my personal life becoming entertainment. The most important thing I've learned from this whole experience is that family doesn't automatically deserve access to every part of your life just because they're related to you. Privacy and respect are basic human rights, and I don't have to tolerate people who violate those boundaries, even if they're my parents. My relationship with my extended family is still weird. Some of them seem to understand that what happened was wrong, while others still think I overreacted to a harmless joke. I've accepted that not everyone will see it from my perspective, and I'm okay with keeping my distance from the people who can't respect my feelings about it. My grandmother has become even more special to me through all of this. Having someone in my family stand up for me and validate my experience meant everything. She showed me what it looks like when someone actually has your back, and I'll never forget that. I still have the shoebox with my letters, but I ended up burning most of them a few weeks ago. I kept just a couple that reminded me of good memories with my ex, but the rest felt tainted by what happened. Watching them turn to ash in my grandparents' fireplace felt like reclaiming some of my power over the situation. I'm not sure if I'll ever fully get over the humiliation of that Thanksgiving dinner, but I'm learning to live with it. Some experiences change you permanently, and I think this was one of those for me. I'm more guarded now, more careful about who I trust with vulnerable parts of myself. But I'm also stronger. I know now that I deserve basic respect and privacy, and I won't accept less than that from anyone, family included. It took having my boundaries completely demolished to learn how important it is to protect them, but maybe that lesson was worth the pain of learning it. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the people who are supposed to love and protect you the most can be the ones who hurt you the deepest. But it also showed me that there are people in this world who will stand up for you when it matters, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable for them to do so. I'm grateful for my grandmother's courage, my mom's eventual willingness to change, and even my own strength in surviving something that felt absolutely devastating at the time. I'm not the same person I was before Thanksgiving, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing.